Good evening, everyone. I'll just note there have been lots of times in Mormon church history where lawsuits have happened, and the folks who have sued the church or sued a leader have tried to get those leaders up on the stand. It's happened with in a court case with Thomas S. Monson. Nelson's been called before. I think Gordon B. Hinckley's had to share his testimony in front of the government. But often when these things happen, and more times than not, they've been able to get out of having to take the stand and be able to say things. Now, there's a moment in church history where a prophet, seer, and revelator has to stand before the American government under oath with penalty of perjury and has to tell the truth. And one would wonder what happens when that's the case. Tonight, the Reed Smoot hearing, we're about to find out here on Mormonism Live. Good evening, Mr. Radio Free Mormon. How are you doing tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Bill Reel. What an incredible cold open that was.
Yeah, that was great. So I've always, been one of these folks that even when I was a believer and in the church, I remember a moment where Monson was being sued by somebody overseas, and it looked like he might have to take the stand. And I thought,
Tom Phillips, right? It was the same guy who came out with the second anointing.
It was.
I think it was the same guy.
It was. And part of me's like, I kind of want Monson to take the stand and see what he would say when he's asked tough questions. And that
I looked at it and I thought, my goodness, you're a prophet. Damn it. Be like a prophet. Don't be afraid. Be bold. Be brave. The spotlight is on you. The world is watching. What more could you ask for as a prophet to be able to have a platform to share the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Yeah. And Abinadi did it at the risk of life and limb. If you remember, he comes back into the town in disguise, only so that he could buy himself an opportunity to stand before the king and to bear his testimony. He knew it wasn't going to go well. He knew that when he came back in, it was going to be figured out who he was in a matter of no time. In fact, as soon as he came into the town, I think they said, "There's Abinadi." So even
as soon as he came in the town, he said, "I'm Abinadi."
Yeah. So the disguise wasn't that great.
By the way, it's funny because it's true.
Yeah, he must have taken the beard off or whatever it was.
It wasn't a very good disguise. It was no.
But there is this instance in church history where I think a prophet, seer, and revelator was scared to death of being questioned by the U.S. government. And tonight we're going to go into that. Tonight is the Reed Smoot hearing. I'm going to pull up the slideshow here, take this piece off the screen, put that up, and we'll use this. So there's the thumbnail for tonight. The Reed Smoot hearing when honesty hurt. We'll see.
And the things that he said that were honest did hurt, but I'm not sure that everything he said was honest.
Yeah, I think enough he said was honest that you and I will be able to see what the game was. And I think he gives up the game pretty quick. So first, I'll just start off with why the Reed Smoot hearings happened. In 1903, Reed Smoot, an apostle in the LDS Church, was elected to the U.S. Senate from Utah. His election sparked national controversy. Just a few years earlier, Mormon politician B.H. Roberts had been denied his seat in Congress because he was a polygamist, but Smoot wasn't. Reed Smoot was not a polygamist, but as a high-ranking church leader, his seating raised alarm. Again, the church is still, please.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's an apostle. He's known for these hearings more than he is for being an apostle. He's an apostle. What if I don't know, Maryland sent over a cardinal in the Catholic Church as their senator? There might be some questions about that.
Yeah. There comes a point where someone so high up in an institution, especially when that institution has a history in the short-lived time that the church is around.
Recent history.
Yes. At running deeply counter to the state and local officials, running counter to the U.S. government, and doing whatever the hell it wants at the risk of life and limb, in Joseph Smith's instance, as he destroys the Nauvoo expositor. So he had been denied. So Reed Smoot had been denied his seat in Congress because, B.H. Roberts had been denied his seat in Congress because he was a polygamist. Smoot was not, but yes, he was an apostle. His seating raised alarm. Many Americans, especially Protestant groups, suspected that Mormon leaders still secretly sanctioned polygamy despite the 1890 manifesto officially ending it. And I put here, and guess what? They were right. Their intuition about what the Mormon church was doing, whatever evidence they saw, whatever whisperings were being heard, whatever news was getting back to Washington. It was believed, and correctly so, that the Mormons had said they had given it up, but they were just lying and playing games. They also feared the Mormon church's influence over politics. Of course you would. It happens in Kirtland. It happens in Nauvoo. It happens in other little places all along the way that the saints are traveling, and it sure as hell is happening in Utah. So they questioned the Mormons' loyalty to the United States. And in fact, opponents pointed to rumors of a secret Mormon oath of vengeance against the U.S., part of the then current temple ritual, as evidence that LDS apostles like Smoot might be bound by sinister vows. And that too was also true. So again, they were right. And amid these pressures, the Senate's Committee on Privileges and Elections launched an investigation in 1904. By the way, same year as the Second Manifesto, strangely, which we'll see that tonight, to determine whether Smoot should be allowed to take his Senate seat. And I'll just say here, you can actually still go online and find all of the paperwork, all the documentation for these proceedings. They are government records. They are kept. You can open the PDF and you can read the original copied images here. And so here's the title page, the front cover on the left, and here is, I think, page 1 on the right. And you can just go read the whole thing for yourself. So if you doubt, if you're a believer and you're watching this, I always say that, but it's true. I don't want you to doubt what we're saying. Go read the frickin' proceedings and see if what we said is in there. So I'll say that. And then I'll just note there are a ton of cartoons of the day. I added a few into the slideshow. On the left-hand side, you've got Mormon hierarchy. It says murderer of apostates or murder of apostates. You got other little written in things of like problematic topics in Mormonism.
Polygamy.
Polygamy. Right there on the sleeve of the arm. And just noting that this plays into the U.S. government telling Reed Smoot to get the hell out of here. And then on the right, an uneasy seat in the Senate. There's a tack or a nail on the chair that Reed Smoot's having trouble sitting down in the chair of, and it's because of Mormonism. And it's just to note that this is a thorn in his side, essentially, that this is what is the obstacle keeping Reed Smoot from being approved and making it into the Senate.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. So RFM, you added this today, and I think this is a really important thing that you added. So please talk about this slide.
Look, this guy's an apostle. He's not a regular member of the church. I mean, he's an apostle. There's 12 of them. Then there's the first presidency and all this stuff they're going to ask about, and President Joseph F. Smith is going to have to tell them about. But they are concerned that a person who's a member of the church of high rank in the church is going to be doing what the church tells him to do in the Senate instead of representing his constituency, which is what he's supposed to do. At the time, he would have been picked by the legislature in Utah, but regardless, he has a job to represent, right? Not the church, not to be a pawn for the church in the halls of the Senate of the United States, for crying out loud. And of course, the Mormons would look at this and say, well, no, of course, he's going to be his own man. But the strange thing, the incredible thing, the thing I'm still shaking my head over, is that in 2009, an Oregon senator, he's a former Oregon senator in 2009, right? And so he talks to the brethren. There are tapes that get leaked by Mormon Leaks. It's one of the most famous things that they leaked, as far as I'm concerned, and they leaked a lot of important things. But what happened is that he goes in front of them. The apostles, they're all gathered in this room to hear from him. And he goes on and on about how it is that it was his joy, his duty, his privilege to be there to represent the interests of the church. This guy's a U.S. senator from Oregon, for crying out loud. He's supposed to represent the people of Oregon because it is an election now. It used to be appointed. But it is his job, it's his duty to represent the Constitution and the people of Oregon. And he's taken orders from the LDS Church and basically kissing their feet in gratitude for the privilege. Now, Bill, you're going to have a few things to say. Let me know when you get to the clip, and I'll go ahead and introduce it, mainly because it's about 40 minutes long. We're not playing the whole thing. I would urge you to go to Mormon Leaks and check this out for yourself if you have not. It is one of the most astounding things. It is a standalone episode of The Twilight Zone.
Can I just say one thing before you introduce this and we push play, which is all my time in the church, every once in a while, it would come up in conversation about dual responsibilities in this way, that if someone's in politics or someone's a police officer, we've had these conversations in regards to the BYU police and their duty in both directions. And whenever believers responded to me, at times I was a believer asking the question, or it came up in a class. Other times I'm a post-Mormon, I'm having the conversation online. But believers always think it's a simple thing for them to just go ahead and choose both. Like, I've made a commitment to the police department. I've made a commitment to the local government. I've made a commitment to the national government. And I'll have no problem knowing clearly where the line is of keeping my oaths and covenants that I've made with Mormonism to my God in that faith, and keep my responsibilities as a public representative who has a duty to the public benefit. And I'll just note, you go back into the early history and they don't clearly know the line. And the video you're about to play, you'll see the same, more of the same. But it just strikes me now, as I think about the Reed Smoot hearing, that of course, U.S. politicians, U.S. government officials, and the general public should have deep concerns about any Latter-day Saint who both believes literally in Mormonism and takes their sacred covenant seriously, and who have also promised to uphold the law of the land and to carry out that responsibility as well, because history has shown that has never been navigated very cleanly.
Yes, and as outrageous a sentiment as it is, I have to say, and I can say it truthfully, is that this is why you should never vote for a Mormon unless you want to take a substantial risk that Mormon is going to be representing the Mormon church and not his or her constituency. And it's an outrageous thing to say, but this is outrageous. They said it themselves. And now I have a brief clip. It's like a minute or two. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this. Most people out there have already seen this. If not, I urge you to go see it at Mormon Leaks, as I said. But this is the guy on the still. That's Gordon Smith. That's the prior senator. That's the Benedict Arnold, right? Good looking guy.
What makes it easy too, RFM, is this is not a Utah politician.
No, Oregon.
This guy is several state lines away. He's in Oregon. Yes, it's insane that you have an out of Utah politician who's saying these things.
Yes. Now, we're not going to hear his words. What we're going to hear is the guy who's introducing him. The guy who's introducing him is the liaison between the church and Gordon Smith's office. He's the guy who passes the messages from the church to his office and gets the messages back from his office and gives them to the high mucky mucks in the church. And this is what he has to say in honor of Gordon Smith.
I stand as a witness of his tireless advocacy for the vital interest of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For in my experience, he always stood ready first and foremost as a high priest and as a covenant member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint, and receptive and able and willing to serve its most vital interest in Washington and, in fact, internationally.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
You know, if I were to say that Gordon Smith is a disgrace to his office, I don't think I would be overstating it.
And if anybody out there wants to go, yeah, but that's just the guy introducing him. What you didn't play, RFM, is Gordon Smith coming in right after and agreeing with all of that and admitting to the room that he is church broke. His words, not mine.
That's that's where I learned the expression first, was hearing this this former senator from Oregon say about how church broke. Is it his office is? All the people on his staff, or he is, or I think it's everybody in his office.
Yeah, it's him and those who work for him to accomplish all of this.
Yeah. So you good people there in Oregon who are watching the show, this is the guy that you voted for, and I'll bet you didn't know he was actually representing the Mormon church and not you.
Yes, if there was a decision to be made where he had to choose one over the other, he acknowledges that he would choose the church.
Well, one of the things he said is he voted in favor of, was it the Iraq War?
Yes.
He voted in favor of the Iraq War because he thought it would be good to get Mormonism in there to have a war. Because after the soldiers come the missionaries. So you have a war, boom, Mormonism's going in there. Hell yeah, I'll vote in favor of that war. In the United States Senate for that reason? Are you kidding me?
To send kids to die so that your church might have an opportunity to proselyte is crazy. And so now as we turn back to the Reed Smoot hearing, you get why this is a big deal to the people of their day. They think they've got another Gordon Smith on their hands, and they have a church that is in at least as much, if not more, violation of U.S. law than the modern church has been in the last few years here. Here's a few other things. Salt Lake Tribune, Reed Smoot charged before the Senate with being an active polygamist. So that might have been the charges in the beginning. It obviously comes out that he's not a polygamist, but they still have deep concerns. There's another little newspaper comic. There's one on the right where it looks like, I think that's supposed to be like a Mormon leader and using Reed Smoot as a puppet.
It's probably Joseph F. Smith.
Yeah. It looks a little bit like Joseph F. Smith and Snuffleupagus had a child, but not sure what's going on there. But yeah, I'm sure that's what it was. The Reed Smoot hearings took place from 1904 to 1907. They became a national spectacle. Yeah. Dozens of witnesses testified, including Mormon leaders, ex-Mormons, Protestant critics, airing out the church's private practices in a very public forum. The most notable and sensational testimony came from Joseph F. Smith, the president and prophet of the LDS Church, who was subpoenaed to testify in early 1904. President Smith had 5 plural wives and dozens of children, making him a prime focus for senators probing post-manifesto polygamy. Newspapers eagerly covered the proceedings, and political cartoonists had a field day lampooning the drama. I'll take this one, RFM, too, and then I'll have you take the next one if you don't mind. Why the Reed Smoot hearings happened. There's a cartoon here, and I want to read the thing that goes with the cartoon. Underneath, it says a 1906 cartoon titled 43 Long Stockings, a Hanging on the Wall, mocked President Joseph F. Smith's large polygamous family. In it, Smith holds a sack of gifts, while 43 Christmas stockings hang from the mantle, representing his children, under a sign reading, "What is a home without a dozen mothers?" The cartoon jokes, isn't it punishment enough for President Smith of the Mormon Church to have 43 children at Christmas time without fining him $300? In 1906, Joseph F. Smith did indeed plead guilty to unlawful cohabitation and paid a $300 fine as part of the efforts to comply with the law. The hearing, and then on the right here, it says the hearing's purpose, in short, was to scrutinize the LDS Church, especially polygamy, and to judge whether a Mormon apostle was fit for high office. It was a collision of church and state, and it put leaders on the witness stand under oath, something unprecedented in church history. So that's super cool. I think the only other time I can think of anything similar happening is when Gordon B. Hinckley had to testify about some small matter before the U.S. government. It had something to do with like missionaries going into Kosovo or something.
Yes.
So there's that. Would you take this one?
Sure. What transpired? Church leaders under oath. President Joseph F. Smith arrived in Washington, D.C., and took the stand in March 1904 for what turned into 6 days of testimony, period. By the way, question for you, Bill Reel. When did the Second Manifesto come out?
The Second Manifesto came out in 1904.
Yeah, in April, the following month.
Hmm.
Coincidence? You decide.
By the way, I just want to say before you continue, this happens so much in Mormonism. Dan Vogel's great at helping us make sense of these things because often you need to know that 3 or 4 events are happening in connection to each other or happening at the same time to make sense of them. And the way the church teaches these things is they isolate a moment, an experience, an event in church history often without giving you enough other things to connect the dots. So we learn that there's a manifesto in 1890 that ends a polygamy, but there's still some rogue Mormons who are practicing it. And then the 1904 Second Manifesto comes out where the church is like, all of you guys knock it off. You need to know about the Reed Smoot hearing. You need to know about post-manifesto polygamy to be able to make sense of the First and Second Manifesto. And the church never gives you those things in context.
Very good. Unlike a typical general conference sermon where the prophet speaks with unquestioned authority, here Joseph F. Smith faced aggressive questioning from senators and attorneys. Every word was transcribed. This created a unique record of how Mormon leaders explained or defended their doctrines and practices under oath. And indeed, plenty of surprising tidbits came out in the interrogation, statements that have since fascinated historians and critics alike. One small point of drama came immediately. And I want to say a couple of things about this one small point of drama. President Smith refused to swear an oath on the Bible. WTF? He refused to swear an oath on the Bible. He cited scripture about not swearing oaths. He said, I prefer to affirm, if you please, opting to affirm the truth of his testimony rather than use the traditional oath. Now, before we get to this final parenthetical comment, I don't know everything about Mormonism. I know a lot about Mormonism. My knowledge is vast, but not encyclopedic. But to the best of my knowledge, this has never been a thing in Mormonism. In fact, Mormonism has a lot of oaths that we all take or took in the temple, multiple oaths for crying out loud. Mormons don't deny or don't not use oaths. They pride themselves in them. They abound in oaths. So this is a very strange thing. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, in contrast to the Mormons, they've long maintained that they're not going to swear an oath. And they cite the scripture, right? They're not going to swear an oath. And so we've allowed for that in the law and recognized that as a constitutional okay. So that's where the language from the Jehovah's Witnesses, I believe, if I'm remembering my con law 101 correctly, they got the change made in the language, which is customarily given by the bailiff or the judge to a witness coming forward to testify. Used to be, do you swear that the testimony you give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Now it's, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give will be the truth? And so he opts for affirm. Now, I don't think that's a Mormon thing. Correct me if I'm wrong. If Dan Vogel, if you're watching, just correct the heck out of me. But what I think is this, okay? Here's why I think he did this. It's not because of why he said. I think he knows exactly what it is he's going to be questioned about. And the problem is it's 1904. The manifesto was given in 1890, and there's been a lot of hanky-panky going on behind the scenes involving entering into new plural marriages. That's been going on in the leadership, who've also sent people and colonies out to Mexico and to Canada. There's been discussion about having a boat off California, so it's off, outside the United States. All of this stuff going on. And he knows about it. He's been involved in it, for crying out loud, up to his eyebrows. And now fate has determined that he has been subpoenaed to go to Washington, D.C. to be asked questions under oath about this issue. And he knows that he is not going to be able to answer those questions honestly. or the jig will be up. And he has every reason to think that the government will go back to confiscating all the church's property and just making an end of them. Remember, that's what the church had to do in 1890 to keep the government from following through on that. So he has got this situation, this hot seat that he's in, Joseph F. Smith. And I think that if I'm correct about this thing about Mormonism, that no, that's not a thing in Mormonism, and it never has been. Have you ever heard of that being a thing in Mormonism, Bill?
Let me say one more thing about that.
What?
We have the oath and covenant of the priesthood. Sure as hell, it's not a thing. We don't have a thing where oaths are bad. It's the oath and covenant of the priesthood.
And that's exactly the point. Thank you so much for looking that up. Right. The oath of the priesthood. Of course, he believes in oaths. But the thing is that from these two facts, right, what I could suggest is that, number one, taking an oath does mean something to Joseph F. Smith, more than just affirming it. And he's choosing to affirm it and not take the oath because he's preparing to lie his ass off.
That to me is the only explanation. There's already been a lie happening in Mormonism. They tell some of the members understood the 1890 manifesto to be the end of polygamy. Meanwhile, under the cover of darkness, they send saints to Mexico, Canada, and places in the US, tell them to keep the principle going, that we'll come back for you and you'll keep this priesthood responsibility happening over there. Meanwhile, we'll be over here pretending like we've ended polygamy. And even that's not true, because Wilford Woodruff has himself sealed to a woman, I think on a ship, after the 1890 manifesto himself. At least I think D. Michael Quinn pointed to that as a high likelihood. And so I'll just note that the church is being dishonest with itself. It's being dishonest with some of the members. It's being dishonest. The way it treated Matthew Cowley and John W. Taylor, it essentially threw them under the bus because it let them take the fall, as if they didn't have the permission of church leaders to continue doing it. And they weren't the only ones. They're just the only ones who got punished for it.
By the way, Bill, guess what two apostles voluntarily absented themselves from the April 1904 General Conference when the Second Manifesto was presented by Joseph F. Smith?
Yeah, Cowley and John W. Taylor, whose trial doesn't happen until 1911, I believe.
Right. But they were absent in protest of this manifesto being presented because they believed in plural marriage and continued to practice it, which is what got them excommunicated in 1911. And we did a great show on that. That was one of your shows, I think, with your research a couple of years ago now about that trial.
Yeah, and it ties into them being dishonest in 1936 when they claimed that the 1886 revelation of John Taylor doesn't exist, and if it did, it wouldn't be legitimate anyway.
The third manifesto. That's what you're talking about. Yep.
Yeah. So I'll just note here in the next slide, this is the Bismarck Daily Tribune. That's the front page. You'll see in the very far right, just a little from the top. Well, actually, very top, it says President Smith is very frank. Says he has repeatedly violated the laws against polygamy by living with his plural wives. So that's front page of the paper. And then the article.
Can I just say something about that, Bill?
Yeah.
This is lying 101. When you are scared about being caught in a huge issue, you give them a little something, a little meat there for the dogs so that you can escape. So you admit to a small thing to hide a big thing. And I think that's obviously, at least to me, what it is that Joseph F. Smith was doing there. And that's why he paid the $300.
Yes. So rather than tell the full truth and say, hey, we're still condoning these. We're still promoting that these happen in certain corners of the church. And we're pretending not to do it so you guys won't yell at us or get us in trouble. You won't take our property away. But, truth be told, let me come clean. We're still doing it. So instead of saying all of that, he goes, look, we're not doing it anymore. But I have wives from before the manifesto, and they're still hanging out with me.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's against the law. Wow. He admitted to something that was against the law. He must be frank.
Yeah. And then just slightly indented, one more to the far right column, and then slightly indented down, you've got Reed Smoot Inquiry. And on the next slide here, I've got that blown up. I'm not going to take the time to read all of that, but just note if you want to, I'll make it big for just a second. Whoop, let me get this off the screen. And folks can pause their video and they can read through that. On your television, you should be readable. On your phone, you might have a little more trouble. All right. So there's that. It just goes into detail about what's happening in the proceedings.
Hey, Bill, can I read?
Yeah, please.
Oh, no. This is a replication of the important parts of that prior slide, I think.
Let's see here.
And that's good, because otherwise I was going to ask you to let me read the prior slide, or at least parts of it. Yeah, this synopsizes it good. Well, sorry.
Good. So let me take the comments off the screen for a second. Prophet, seer, and revelator ? Titles and succession. By the way, the first presidency at the time, I learned something new because I really don't know much about John R. Winder. So I did go read his profile on Wikipedia, his biography on Wikipedia. And he's from, I forget what country, Denmark maybe, but he's from outside the United States. And he worked some trade. I don't know if he was a shoemaker or something like that, but he worked some trade and joins the church and becomes a very trusted person in the church and works his way up all the way to being in the first presidency of the church. So I thought that was sort of interesting. But the first presidency at the time, John R. Winder, Joseph F. Smith, and Anthony H. Lund, I believe, definitely 1901. I believe they're still the leaders in 1904. If I'm not mistaken.
Joseph F. Smith became president in 1901 until his decease in 1918.
So early in the hearing, Joseph F. Smith's status in the church was clarified for the non-Mormon senators. Robert W. Taylor, and yes, that's spelled right, Tayler. He's an attorney who's representing the protesting parties, and he's the one who gets to cross-examine Joseph F. Smith. So he asked Smith if he was a prophet, seer, and revelator, and Smith answered carefully. And this is the thing that always stuck out to me all the way back to my believing days, was this one question and answer. He says, quote, "I am so sustained and upheld by my people," unquote. Now, that's bullshit. They're the ones who tell me that they are to be referred to as prophets, seers, and revelators. And then every year or two in Mormonism, I had to sit down with a local leader who asked a question, and that question was written and approved by the leadership in Salt Lake. And I was asked if I sustained the president of the church as a prophet, seer, and revelator. So again, this is just using your words to wiggle out of things. And what he's doing is he's putting the blame, which is what Mormonism's ever done since the beginning, is put the blame on the members for thinking he's a prophet, rather than being bold, as you said earlier, and saying, by golly, yes, I'm a prophet. And, if you don't buy into that, then so be it. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't want to say that he thinks he's a prophet. And even as a believer, RFM, when I read this about the Reed Smoot hearing, my first thought was, he doesn't want to lie. He doesn't want to tell them that he thinks of himself as a prophet when he knows that he's not one. It seems like that's sort of the way he's wiggling out of it. All right. So President Smith was exceedingly cautious not to appear arrogant or theocratic. That would be a very generous, I think, perception of what happened there.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Maybe in his defense, that's a question that presidents of the church have probably gotten, at least since Joseph Smith's time. Joseph Smith's response was, yes, I am a prophet. That was his response to the question. But, there's nothing good that can come from answering that question, yes, because what's the next question going to be? And then what's the next question going to be? I think this is it's a thought-stopping technique. It's a question-stopping technique.
But only if you're not a prophet. If you are a prophet, and as you point out, the next questions I think you would say are, what have you prophesied? What revelations have you had? And if you really were a prophet and you really did commune with God from on high, you'd have something material, tangible in terms of idea or concept that you could give these people and say, this is further light and knowledge. And I think he knows that he's only going to get himself into trouble if he answers the first question.
Yeah.
Okay. So observers later noted how unusual it was to hear a Mormon prophet sound so hesitant about that title. One commentator quipped that he expected a stronger answer than "I am so sustained," perhaps a firm "Yes, I am." He was also asked about the church's leadership.
By
Yes.
the way, the problem with saying "I am so sustained" is that what it sounds like to everybody else is that you're not a prophet, but you've got all your members fooled into thinking you are. That's how it comes across.
Yeah. And I think another option is that one could interpret that as he was selected by the people, that they selected him. But that's not true. The hierarchy of the church chooses the next leader, presents a sustaining vote, and even if you vote against, you're the problem. Go see your bishop, and it gets resolved with getting you to quiet down. Go see Nemo for further example. Okay. He was asked about the church's leadership hierarchy. Smith explained that the first presidency, the president and his two counselors, stood at the head, followed by the quorum of the 12 apostles. Notably, he taught that the first presidency are presiding high priests and refrained from saying that they were apostles themselves. This surprised one senator, and even many Latter-day Saints today might not realize that technically counselors in the first presidency no longer act in the capacity of apostles while in that role. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. That was what it said in one of the articles that was examining the Reed Smoot hearings.
It is basically correct. You act as a counselor to the president, and upon his death, then now all of a sudden you become an apostle again, or you're acting in the role of an apostle. You're still an apostle, but then you become a real apostle again, and you take your position in the seniority in the quorum of the 12.
Don't you think the general gist of doing it that way,
Quorum of the 14, sorry.
yeah, is that the president of the church, through formality, gets you to agree, essentially, that your loyalty is to him as a member of the first presidency rather than loyalty to the 12 that are back there in the quorum?
Yes.
Yeah. And we don't know this. I'm just going to throw it out. I don't know which way this goes, but when the issues with the SEC came out, of course, Dieter Uchtdorf, having served in the first presidency, we would assume that he knew about all of that funny business and then went back into the 12 and certainly could have told them. But we don't know if generally secrets are kept among the first presidency that perhaps the 12 don't know. And I would have no way of showing that other than when the I'm trying to think if this is even a good example, but when President Monson was president of the church, his counselors were Henry B. Eyring and Peter F. Uchtdorf. And he gets to the end of his life, and Nelson tries to put the policy into the mouth of President Monson. And somehow there's some rumors that behind the scenes he's sort of being manipulated, Monson, that is, by Nelson and by Oakes. And so that would be an indicator that on some level they all kind of work together and can push for something to happen, any one from the quorum of the 12 versus the first presidency. But there are other moments in church history, and I can't think of any offhand. Maybe somebody in the comments can. But my brain tells me that there's been moments where the first presidency knew things that the 12 didn't necessarily know. And at least I'm curious. I'm off in the weeds now, but at least I'm curious where the dividing lines are between the first presidency and the quorum of the 12. Again, going back to early church history, Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Hiram, William Law, whoever served in the first presidency. There's that one guy that we only learned of because research was done on the replacement name, but they weren't members of the quorum of the 12. The first presidency and the quorum of the 12 were two completely separate groups of people.
Yes.
It's only in an effort by Brigham Young to consolidate power and to make sure that no flaws happened in the future where people pushed against each other, you create one line of trajectory of how you move into the leadership of the church. It all goes through the quorum of the 12, and hence you gain a little bit more allegiance and unity by doing it that way.
Yes. And then 3 years later, 1847, then he recreates the first presidency out of the apostles. So now there's 15 apostles, and there have been ever since.
Yeah, so Joseph F. Smith himself had been ordained an apostle back in 1867, but he explained he ceased functioning as one when he became a counselor in the first presidency years before, and then president of the church. So just to note, kind of a strange way of articulating how these various offices at the highest levels of the church delineate. So there's that. Now, I'll go back here to the slide. His answer, "I am so sustained and upheld by my people," sounded familiar to you, didn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, how old is this script anyway that Gordon B. Hinckley was playing off of? Does it go back to Joseph F. Smith and the Reed Smoot hearings when in April 1997, he was being interviewed, and this is from the SF Gate, San Francisco Gate, Sunday interview, musings of the Maine Mormon, Gordon B. Hinckley, president, prophet, seer, and revelator of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, sits at the top of one of the world's fastest growing religions. And so we come into the middle of this interview and we find the following. Say it with me, folks. The question is this: you are the president, prophet, seer, and revelator of the Mormon Church? Answer: I am so sustained. Yes. Laughter.
Why laughter? Doesn't that seem a little strange? It's almost like everybody in the room understands what game is being played, because I remember this when it happened.
Mhm.
This has
And it
happened.
happened more than once, I think, because you're always going to be asked that question, aren't you? So you're a prophet?
Yeah. He's interviewed by Mike Wallace several times. He's interviewed by Larry King several times. He does several interviews in major newspapers and periodicals. He is the one who's trying. He's the one of anybody who is trying to be like a Benedict and get the message out front. And this always struck me as odd. This is an answer that, again, avoids acknowledging that it's you and your church that tell the members what your label is, what your office is, and what their job is to sustain you as.
This is one of the problems I think Mormonism suffers from more and more, is that it's embarrassed of itself. The members are embarrassed of what the church teaches. The leaders are embarrassed of what the church teaches. The president is sometimes embarrassed of what the church teaches, and that's why they have to go to such extremes to try and make it sound like they actually believe something else.
Yeah, and somebody noted that, by the way, somebody noted there that, see if I can find it again. Oh, man, I just had it up on the screen.
Okay, while you're looking for it, I'm going to just modify what I just said, okay? Because I don't mean everything that they believe that they're embarrassed of, but there are certain elements of Mormonism that are touch points that we don't want to be talking about with non-members because they're weird. And we know they're weird, and that's what makes us embarrassed of it. It's also one of the reasons it's so hard to get Mormons to do missionary work with their neighbors or friends and talk to them about the gospel, because they're kind of embarrassed of it.
The comment I can't find, but the person noted that this is the reason they're laughing is this is absurd, and there is some truth to that. Come on, you're sustained a prophet, right? Ha ha ha!
Yes.
It's
like we'll have our little joke here, because the Rubes back in Utah, I got them fooled. Yeah, I'm sustained as a prophet.
Yeah. Back in Ohio, there's a donut place that was really good, really sort of, it was a small little family kind of business, but it was famous. It had been around since I was a tiny kid, and it was still there when I had moved away as a grown adult. But they had a bulletin board, and it was as nice of a bulletin board that the community had anywhere in my hometown. And there were always these religious revival things happening. That's what I'm going to call it. But it's where other churches, top leaders came into the area to hold a special meeting. And these people always had titles of apostle, the apostle this and the apostle that. And it was often like black churches. It was a lot of black leaders. But the apostle and prophet were numerous. I remember almost every time I walked in, there was some other church coming into town with its leaders proclaiming that this leader was an apostle. You should come listen to him. This leader is a prophet. You should come listen to him. And I would just go, that's absurd. Even as a believing Mormon, I would look at that and go, that's absurd. There's all kinds of people on the earth who claim they are prophets. And then I would make the exception that my guy really is.
Yes.
But then if we just stop and go, okay, what did your guy give you? Even the church, in trying to write biographies for these people, in putting on the church's website a timeline of all the cool things that have happened in church history, often they just name that one prophet came into leadership. 3 years later, he died, and the next guy came into leadership. There's no major things they give us. And it's so bad that they have to give us something. So they tell us how, one of them, and again, I always want to say George Albert Smith, but I don't think that's who it is, perfects his handwriting and perfects his fastball.
Oh, yeah. That's Heber J., I think.
That's the story we tell because we don't have any other stories to tell about him.
That was a hell of a fastball, though. Don't discount the fastball.
And he could hit the broadside of a barn. So
that's how I know he's a prophet.
Do you want to read this one?
Sure. Hey, that's an interesting photo. I don't think I've seen that one before. Perhaps most striking was his description of how successors are chosen. Senator Hoare inquired whether each new apostle or church president is chosen by revelation from God. Joseph F. Smith replied that the original 12 in Joseph Smith's time were chosen by revelation, but the current quorum of the 12 is chosen by the choice of the body, i.e., by the apostles themselves, with first presidency approval, not by new direct revelations. He went on to say that when a church president dies, the senior apostle succeeds by long-standing custom. Well, a few decades, but really not that long-standing. A long-standing custom. The senior apostle, through custom of the church since the death of Joseph Smith, has been recognized as the legitimate successor. He explicitly agreed that this rule of succession is just simply a custom. In other words, no new divine oracle names the next prophet. It happens by protocol and common consent. I think there are still Mormons in the church who think that there's some kind of prayer and some kind of revelation or appearance and a designation of which apostle is going to be the next president.
The custom is evidence enough that no revelation is happening because they do get together. They do pray. If revelation came into the room and always picked the one with the most seniority, he would be free to say so. And other leaders who have commented on this same succession protocol would have had freedom to say so. If God spoke in these meetings and said, I know this is your custom, but I actually want elder so-and-so to be the prophet, then we would break the custom at least once in a while. Yeah. The way they frame it and the fact that they follow this custom every single time indicates there is no revelation.
No, not a bit. It's a procedure, and it's very simple. I mean, we have known since before President Nelson passed away who would be the next president of the church, as long it's Elder Oaks, unless Elder Oaks predeceases President Nelson. It is all the way to the very end. From 1 through 15, we know the order and we know who's going to advance. It's that easy. It's not even difficult, not even for me, who's not very good at math. So that's the situation. The guy who baptized me, Bruce, I remember one day he was talking to me about the succession in the presidency. There had not been a succession. It's the late 70s. It's Spencer Kimball from 73 to 85. But the subject has come up. Don't know why. But he was very animated and excited and impassioned about how it is that when a president dies, all the other apostles get together and they get in a room and they pray. And they pray and they pray until they all agree that this one person is supposed to be the next president by revelation. No. It's even better than that. This was a story that he told me, which he obviously got from somewhere else, right? He told me that each of the apostles pray independently. It's even better. And come up with a name. This is like a magic trick. And so then they all get back together and they turn over their card, and lo and behold, all of them have 5 of diamonds. So they've all picked the same person. And that's how it works. Because this is what we would like to think. I don't know if he still believes that. He may not. But he certainly did then. And so I did too, because he's telling me about Mormonism and how it works. So I believe this. It wasn't until after I got back from my mission and read a pamphlet by Joseph Fielding Smith called Succession in the Presidency, I think it was, where he just sort of lays it out there. This is how it happens. So anyway, this was continuing with this paragraph. This was an eye-opening admission, what he had said, that it's just a matter of form. Members of the church were accustomed to thinking God directs the choice of each new apostle and president. Yet under oath, President Smith humbly described it as an orderly procedure carried out by church authorities themselves, not typically accompanied by open revelatory pronouncements. One senator noticed President Smith's generally cautious phrasing. He often prefaced statements with, "I believe," "my understanding is," "so far as I know." Yeah, it's important to try and avoid that perjury trap. When asked why, Smith explained that when it came to matters of doctrine, he could speak with certainty, but on other matters of memory or opinion, he would only state what he believed to be true. Indeed, throughout his testimony, he was extremely careful, doubtless aware that any misstep could be perjury. Yeah, you got to be careful.
And just to show, this isn't the original pamphlet, but you can still buy a copy of the pamphlet online, Succession in the Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, written by Joseph Fielding Smith. I'll just see if there's an original. I don't think there was.
Yeah, that looks more original. It was like a slender sort of blue pamphlet, the kind that they have and they fold in half and they staple it. And it's sort of longish this way. You open up and you read it. Anyway, that was it. I remember a blue cover. Succession.
Yeah, I'll keep looking. I'll try to find the original so folks can at least see that. But we'll just note, we'll just note here that, okay, a church president with no revelation. Perhaps the most surprising exchange came when the committee probed the issue of revelation. After all, the LDS president is revered as a prophet who can receive modern revelation from God. Senator Hoare asked if revelation to the church's head was a fundamental Mormon doctrine. Joseph F. Smith replied in the affirmative.
Yes.
Rejecting a true divine revelation from the prophet would be rejecting a fundamental principle. But then Chairman Burroughs followed up more directly, essentially, quote, "You have revelations, do you not?" Unquote. President Smith's response stunned those in the room. Now I'm going to say this was another one that stuck out to me. When I first heard this, I remember going to Fair Mormon and asking them about this. And they just had some story about how, he's testifying to the government. There's lots of risk here for the church being in trouble for polygamy and other things. He really needed to watch what he said. And sometimes he had to carefully craft his responses so as to not exactly tell the truth. Because no Mormon's going to want to believe that their prophet, seer, and revelator is in fact not any of those three things. But what Smith responded with to that question, "You have revelations, do you not?" He said, "I have never pretended to, nor do I profess to have received revelations. I never said I had a revelation." Joseph F. Smith. Now he has one a month later, we're supposed to believe, but he hasn't had one his entire time. Maybe none of them have had one. Maybe we ought to. Here's the trouble, Arfin. I know you want to jump in, but maybe we ought to just believe these guys. Maybe we ought to just trust them when Elder Oaks says that he nor any of the members among his brethren have had an Alma-like experience. Maybe we ought to trust Joseph F. Smith when he says, "I have never pretended to, nor do I profess to have received revelations. I never said I had a revelation." Maybe we ought to believe Gordon B. Hinckley, who said, "We've got enough from Joseph Smith. We really don't need anything. If something comes up from time to time, we'll fix it. But otherwise, we don't really get any revelations. It's all been had." Maybe we should trust them.
See, this reminds me, this penchant in Mormons, this psychosis, if I may, is that In Mormonism, the members of the church believe things simply because their leaders say that they're true, okay? Mormons will believe things just because their leaders say this, something's true. But when it comes to believing that they've seen Jesus, or in your case, that they receive revelation, but especially seeing Jesus, Mormons are, as far as I know, unique in that they will still believe that their leaders have seen Jesus in spite of the fact they say they haven't. So here, they're not only believing what they say just because they say it, now they're believing the opposite of what they say, in spite of the fact they're saying it.
To the believers and to the folks who have left the LDS church, I just want you to notice that you've been gaslit so much. My girlfriend and I were arguing the other day, is it gaslit in that tense, or is it gaslighted? You've been gaslit or you've been gaslighted. I've seen it used both ways. But I'll just say, all of you have been gaslighted so much that you've been taught to not believe the leaders of the church when they tell the truth. And you've been taught to believe the leaders of the church when they're lying to your face. And it's happened on so many occasions in both directions. And this is an instance where Joseph F. Smith is telling the truth.
Very good. Gaslighted.
There you go.
Although gaslit is also considered acceptable, Bill.
There you go.
Either way.
Okay. Coming from a man who led the church founded on modern revelation, this statement was monumental. Joseph F. Smith clarified that the only thing he would call a revelation was his personal testimony that Mormonism is true. And even that, he said, came to him by inspiration rather than open vision. And when pressed on how he received that inspiration, he quoted scripture. Quote, "The things of God knoweth no man, but the Spirit of God," unquote, essentially describing a quiet spiritual confirmation rather than any sort of dramatic manifestation. This is your prophet, seer, and revelator.
So let me tell you what I used to think about this kind of thing, okay? Whether it's Gordon B. Hinckley on Larry King or Joseph F. Smith in the U.S. Senate. What I thought was that they were lying. That they're lying because they have received revelations, great revelations, magnificent revelations from God and his Son and his angels, but that he is not going to soil the memory of those revelations by sharing them with a crowd of senators who are trying to mock him and would make fun of those revelations, thereby bringing upon themselves the condemnation of God. So that's why he lied. Now, the problem with that is, well, there's a number of things, but the thing that comes to mind right now, the problem with that is what the perceptive and devout Mormon has just done, is found an excuse and justification for lying. And if you lie in order to make the church look better, or to protect the church in some way, or to advance the church's interests, or to obey what the church leaders tell you to do, if you lie, it's okay. It's not just okay, it's a good thing. It's not just a good thing. You are following the prophet.
And if you will lie to protect the church, how would I know when you're not lying to protect the church? To protect yourself, to protect your image or the image of the institution. I can't. And once you've established that you're willing to lie, and combined with the fact that no serious revelation of any usable sort, giving any real further light and knowledge in a way that we could use it as testable. In other words, no revelation in Mormonism is testable. No revelation. If Joseph Smith had come out in 1835 and said something about the medical advancements that had not quite happened yet, but which future times would show him to have been right, we would have something tangible. But Mormon revelation is never that. It's always in the the ghostly ideas of doctrine and theology and in things that indicate that God prioritizes things very differently, not drinking coffee, than what would seem like a much more responsible revelation to come from God. Wash your hands before doing surgery, for instance. It's not those kinds of truths that ever come out.
Yeah. The more I think about this, the more I'm down with President Joseph F. Smith lying to Congress.
Okay.
If I'm in a position, which I'm trying to put myself in his shoes, right? Where I believe, and not without reason, that if I tell the truth, the federal government is going to come down with both feet, with cleats on the Mormon church. And Utah may well lose its statehood. And the church may lose all of its property and all its temples. My friends, my family, or I lie. What would you do, Bill?
I can only note how many people stood up for the gospel of Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ himself. Abinadi, again, is a great example. But there are other examples as well. It slips me right now, but there are the two Book of Mormon prophets who would be able to call upon God and save the children and women from being burned in the fire.
Alma and Amulek.
But which Alma, I believes, informs Amulek that it is better that we stand idly by and let this stand as a witness against those who did it.
So that when God punishes them, they'll really deserve it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Daniel in the lion's den, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego in the furnace.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's hard to figure out when this God's going to step in and do something. And I will say this too. You go back to ancient myth narratives of the scriptures and those kinds of miracles of Daniel in the lion's den and three men being thrown into a furnace and suddenly there are four in there and no one is burned. Strangely, when history becomes verifiable, those kinds of miracles seem to have just vanished off the earth. All right.
In contradistinction to those stories from the Old Testament, I do want to give the Book of Mormon credit for actually trying to deal with the issue of what happens when you don't have power to save somebody. And God doesn't show up to save people who deserve it more than anybody else. They're faithful. They're going through a horrendous death, and you have to stand idly by. And not only that, it's Amulek says to Alma, he says, hey, let's stretch forth our power and exercise our hands and exercise the power of God that's in us. And Alma's going, whoa, not so fast there, pal. These guys got to burn so that when God sends these other people, the bad people, to hell, then they're really going to deserve it. Yeah, it's completely unsatisfactory as far as the rationale goes, but at least it gives it a whack.
He gives it the old college try.
Yes.
All right.
Dartmouth try.
Did you read that slide or did I read that slide?
Oh, you did.
Okay. You want to take this one?
Yeah, he further downplayed his prophetic gifts by comparing them to the experiences of ordinary faithful people. Later in his testimony, Smith allowed that if he lives righteously, he is susceptible to the impressions of the Spirit of the Lord at any time, just as any good Methodist. What? Just as any good Methodist or any other good church member might be? I think he's being a little too humble here. He stressed that he had felt spiritual impressions very frequently, but they are not in the sense of revelations. In effect, the president of the church told Congress that he relied on feelings, nothing more than feelings, from the Holy Spirit, much like any devout Christian, and that he had received no distinct authoritative revelation during his administration, which I guess had lasted 3 years as of this point. But, this is what the leaders of the church have said to the public since at least 1904, okay? And probably before that. They downplay it. But when it comes conference time, kaboom! We are the prophets of God, and we will always teach you the truth. And we've got this direct connection, and you need to listen to us and do what we say. Otherwise, we can't guarantee your future.
Yeah. Man, it's such a strange thing to be a member of the church. This was in my really hardcore believing days when I came across this Reed Smoot testimony. And I was just really let down
Mm.
that our prophet, seer, and revelator at the time didn't want to take on these questions boldly. And it's happening at the same time that I am seeing Gordon B. Hinckley go all around doing interviews. And if you remember, he does the one where he says, I don't know that we teach it. I don't know that we emphasize it, talking about the couplet. And that was another moment combined with this where I'm like, why don't prophets just boldly tell the thing?
Because they're embarrassed.
Yeah,
They're embarrassed by it.
they're embarrassed by it.
If
Yeah.
something can be wacky as hell, but if you're confident in it, I mean, it looks better, okay? It's going to come across better. If you're confident in the crazy shit you believe, don't be embarrassed by it. If you're embarrassed by what you believe, don't believe it.
Yeah. Mormon leaders will easily lie at the avoidance of shame and embarrassment.
Right. Under the heading of milk before meat and do not cast your pearls before swine. That's what covers a multitude of embarrassments.
Yeah.
You want me? I'll continue. Did you want me to continue here, Bill? This candid admission ran contrary to what many church members of the time likely assumed. Here was the prophet, seer, and revelator of the church publicly acknowledging that no new doctrinal revelations had come through him. Indeed, no revelation had been presented to the church as scripture since 1883 until Joseph F. Smith's 1918 vision of the afterlife, which came after the Smoot hearings and eventually was canonized. Joseph F. Smith was heard to say, after receiving this vision in reference to Congress, "Take that, bitches." It's worth noting that Smith was using a narrow definition of revelation. I mean, come on. This had to sting. This had to sting. That he's got to admit, right? No revelations. I got nothing. I'm basically a figurehead. It's totally nepotism. My dad was Hiram. My uncle was Joseph. Yeah, I'm here. What do you want from me?
This was their Gordon B. Hinckley moment. This would have gotten back to the saints. Even the Salt Lake Tribune and other periodicals or newspapers in the nearby regions would have to have sent back word that this was what was asked and this was what was said. And I can only imagine the members of that day wrestling with things in the same way that we wrestled with some of Gordon B. Hinckley's answers in front of the media.
Yes. And those with ears to hear will hear what they're saying.
Yeah.
Which is they're not special. They've got no special access to God. It's the same as other people. I can't believe Joseph F. said the Methodists were crying out loud. I mean, why even be a Mormon then? Anyway, if you listen to what they say, you'll understand they're not the prophets that they want you to think they are. And I know that sounds contradictory, right? If you listen to the outside message, the message they give to the outside world, and understand they're not lying, they're not casting pearls before swine, right? They're not giving the milk before the meat. They're just saying the truth, like you were saying earlier, Bill. If you listen to that, then you'll understand something that's much closer to the truth of the matter, I think. It's worth noting that Smith was using a narrow definition of revelation. For him, a revelation meant a specific direct commandment or doctrinal message from God, prefaced by, "Thus saith the Lord," like those Joseph Smith recorded in the Doctrine and Covenants. By that definition, he hadn't received any such messages. However, he did not deny that he and others were guided by inspiration. Still, the nuance may have been lost on many listeners. Critics seized on his words as evidence that Mormon prophets weren't really getting prophecies, while faithful members later argued Joseph F. Smith was simply being humble and precise in his language.
Yep. President Smith also elucidated that the LDS concept of common consent. When asked if every revelation from God must be accepted by the church, he taught an important principle. He said, quote, "No revelation given through the head of the church ever becomes binding and authoritative upon members of the church until it has been presented to the church and accepted by them, unquote. Now this isn't quite the way we think of it today.
No.
And I'm not even sure if it's the way they would have thought about it then. But it continues, it says, in Mormonism, any new scripture or commandment is supposed to be sustained by the body of the church. Now, that's the way it was set up. The senators found this idea intriguing. One even joked, so, quote, so one of the articles of the Mormon faith is that the Lord, in some respects, has less power than the Mormon Conference, unquote. And to some degree, he would have been right in the way that Joseph F. Smith is trying to express common consent. If a revelation from God were rejected by the people, the church would go with the people's decision over the prophets. Joseph F. Smith, by the way, this played out in early church history. There are moments where Smith makes a request either for something to happen or for someone to be sustained in an office or for
Sidney Rigdon to be removed from the first presidency.
Great example. And the people say no, and Joseph goes, well, you guys get your way. I guess the revelation stops here.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing.
So I'll just sort of discount Sidney in other ways. But yeah, he had to be retained. This is a statement which I think encapsulates my understanding of how the Mormon church was set up to run.
Yeah.
By Joseph Smith, okay? That's how it's supposed to run in theory, which is if a revelation from God were rejected by the people, the church would go with the people's decision over the prophets. They have to do that. Otherwise, it's a dictatorship. Otherwise, it is a theocracy, not a theodemocracy, but a theocracy. And otherwise, it's what we have in the Mormon church today.
Joseph F. Smith continued by insisting that in practice, the church membership had never wholly rejected a revelation from its president. Now, you just shared a great example of an instance where it at least appears that that's the case, where Smith steps forward and says, I need Rigdon out of the first presidency. Now, one could, I guess, argue that he doesn't have God's backing, but then that sort of is a whole nother question of deciding on your own who should be in the first presidency rather than God dictating who should be in. Again, I think that raises other questions.
But notice this next line, which basically gives the lie to what Joseph F. Smith had just said, that you have to have the vote of the people before revelation is binding upon them, right? Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Joseph F. Smith insisted that in practice, the church membership had never wholly rejected a revelation from its president.
Which means that has already become meaningless.
Yes, there's no need to do this whole mechanism when it's just a formality. It's just a custom practice as well.
Yes.
Those who personally rejected divine mandates, he noted, ultimately unchurched themselves. They left the church voluntarily or via excommunication. In other words, there really is no dissent allowed.
No, because then you get kicked out.
And we've seen it happen. It's
wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true.
Oh, Captain, my captain. That's the new president.
Yeah. This give and take between prophetic authority and democratic consent was a fine point of doctrine that the hearings brought to light in a very public way. So anyway,
I just got to chill. You know why?
Why is that?
That's the new president.
Yeah, telling
the president of the Mormon church is on record as saying it's wrong to criticize the leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true.
And remember now, the new custom, or at least the official teaching now, is that no matter what time in his life he taught that, he could be 9 years old. Whenever he taught it, as long as at some point he's the president of the church, it was taught as president of the church.
Right. It's not Deacon Dallin anymore.
No. Strange. Okay, this is, we're about at the halfway point. I did want to just make a cool note to the audience, something I'm really excited about. I'll just note here, I got an email yesterday morning I've been for the last 12 months, I'm coming up on the 1 year of doing this, but I've been working towards a certification as a somatic trauma coach. And I finally got the message yesterday morning that I had graduated from the school. I passed, they call it a 7 CMI, but certain entities that decide what are the constraints and stuff for various kinds of coaches. And this is the entity that oversees trauma coaches, 7 CMI qualifications. So it says, huge congratulations on your somatic trauma-informed coaching and leadership diploma. Please, can you confirm the address, which I did, and they'll send it to me, and they just give me a kudos for passing. So I'm officially a trauma recovery coach, certified to be such. We're in the middle of working on the website, but this is it, awakenandthrive.org. Teresa, who's my girlfriend, is also a trauma recovery coach. She's been doing that long before I met her. And this is really her expertise. And she has certain real finely tuned specializations in pain reprocessing and in a thing called safe and sound protocol, which are ways to help folks who not only have trauma, but have it showing up in their body, often as chronic pain or chronic fatigue. And so you can go onto the website, Awaken and Thrive. If you do have issues that have come up along the way of being on your journey in Mormonism or some other high demand religion, I know we have a lot of Never Mormons who also watch the show. I'll just note that we are doing coaching to help people and support people and give people resources, psychological education and things on how to deal better with how trauma shows up in the body and how it affects you and how you react and live your life on the day-to-day. So I'll just note that. And so that is awakenandthrive.org. I don't hear you, RFM. I do see you clapping, and thank you for that.
I was. Congratulations. I want to hear everybody else to hear me clapping too. Congratulations, Bill.
Yeah,
that's an achievement.
It's another way in which to be of help to this community. And I look forward to opportunities to be a resource and to support others and to provide resources that are helpful to people processing the things that happen to them, making sense of it, and that freeing them to now make new choices in the here and now. So thank you very much, RFM. All right, I'll let you read this one. This is Church Business and Worldly Wealth.
Yeah, this ends up being a big laugh line. Another subject that surprised the Senate committee was how many businesses the LDS president oversaw. Just the one president, Joseph F. Smith. He was asked about his occupation and income. He replied, "My principal business is president of the church." See, he said principal. You know what the next question is going to be. But under further prodding by counsel Robert Taylor, it came out that he was director or president of numerous corporations. ZCMI, Zion's Cooperative Mercantile Institution, the State Bank of Utah, Zion Savings Bank and Trust, Utah Sugar Company, Idaho Sugar Company, Consolidated Wagon and Machine Company, Utah Light and Power, the Salt Lake and Los Angeles Railroad, Saltair Beach Company, Inland Crystal Salt Company, the Salt Lake Knitting Company, Salt Lake Dramatic Association, and more. I counted 12 there. 12 names, by the way, and more. The list seemed endless. Finally, an exasperated Mr. Taylor asked Joseph F. Smith, "Are you the president of any other corporation?" The 65-year-old church president, perhaps a bit embarrassed, answered, "I do not know. Perhaps you can tell me. I do not remember any more just now." This prompted a senator to dryly observe, "It would seem that the number has grown so large that it would be an undue tax upon your memory to charge you with naming them all." The hearing room erupted in laughter. Can you imagine being on so many companies that you can't even remember them all?
Yeah, this is a strange moment, RFM. So the church has done this in two different ways. So it, in this day and age, is essentially just a church. It does have some small little businesses here or there, or at least the president of the church, Brigham Young, for instance, would have a, what's the name of a place, the thing that makes liquor?
Still?
Yeah, Brigham Young would do that, or they'd have a cotton making production in St. George, for instance. So the early church, for the most part, though, is just a church. And I can imagine the benefit to all of the local companies, Zion National Bank, for it to have a church leader on its board. There is a benefit to all of these companies in having church leaders on their boards because that's the approved bank. That's the approved, this or that. So I can see why the commercial companies would want someone on the board. It also has to benefit the church leader. Why would he have himself on the board of a bunch of different companies?
Because this is how he earns money.
Yes. This is how he earns money. It's good for the bank. It's good for the president of the church. The bank gets more customers. All the Mormons come in going, I heard that Joseph F. Smith is on the board here. This must be the bank that God wants us to use.
Can I say for every company, there's boards of directors of, at least of a certain size, and I'm sure that many, if not most, probably almost all members of boards of directors of major corporations are there because they actually bring something to the equation, that they know something that's helpful in their role. But I think that it's true that there are a number of occasions when people get put on boards of directors for no quality of their own, other than the fact that you're laundering money to them.
Yes. And I'm trying to figure out a way to connect the dots that none of these church leaders, again, maybe here or there, but do we think Joseph F. Smith showed up at the board meeting of all these 25 places that he can't even remember them all?
Well, hopefully there were only annual board meetings.
Maybe. But he made a income from having his name on all of these boards that was sufficient to make them have enough money to, I think fairly enough, be considered not poor and not middle class in their day. Brigham Young became a millionaire in Utah. If you don't think that the leaders who came after Brigham wanted to cash in on that office as well, I think that'd be ridiculous. And so I did put up, I'll let you finish reading this, but I just want to note, they don't do it this way today. Right. Now what they do is the church owns all of its own companies. And it doesn't say that it's on the board of those companies, but if any one of the 100 subsidiaries of the church makes a profit, where do you think that profit gets sent to?
To the prophet.
Yes. And if you don't think on some level the church leaders have the ability and likelihood of making money off of all the companies that they own, not just their income in the church, I think that'd be ridiculous to believe that.
Yeah, at some point along the way, my understanding is that they switched to salaries, and I think D. Michael Quinn supports that. I believe the salary amount adjusted for inflation would be around $251,000 a year at this point. That's probably gross. Maybe it's base. I don't know. But that's what I remember reading recently. I can't tell you where I read it, so take it with a grain of salt. But it does make sense with inflation and cost of living going up and everything.
Yeah.
By the way, Mormons are not supposed to know that.
Yeah.
In case there's any post-Mormons out, I mean, not post-Mormons, but never Mormons out there, Mormons are not supposed to know how much the apostles make. They keep it a secret. And the only reason that we know is because one of their pay stubs got leaked by Mormon leaks a number of years ago.
I know that their stipend comes from the church for their role in the church. And I know that D. Michael Quinn has offered his opinion that based on what he could gather, he couldn't find any serious funny business going on. I'm just going to say it here. I don't believe that. I don't.
He's not an accountant. He did his best, and I salute that. And maybe he's right. But
I don't
think in his field. Economics, I don't think was his field.
I don't think you go out of your way to create dummy companies. I don't think you go out of your way to own 100 or 200 subsidiary companies and not have some way that some of that money funnels back to you. That wouldn't make sense to me if that were the case. But anyway, I digress.
For the public, this was an eye-opener. The Mormon prophet was not just a spiritual leader, but a robber baron scale industrialist. Think about how people outside the church are looking at this. Think how people inside the church are looking at this, at least in titles. Of course, many of these enterprises were church-owned or community-oriented, and LDS leaders of that era were deeply involved in building Utah's economy. Still, seeing the interweaving, but I mean, there's a lot of other states in the Union other than Utah, and there's a lot of other economies and communities and cities that were built by non-Mormons, okay? So all I'm saying is it can happen without the church getting involved. The church made a decision to get involved, and they profited greatly by it, I think. Of course, many of these enterprises were church-owned or community-oriented, and LDS leaders of that era were deeply involved in building Utah's economy. Still, seeing the interweaving of religion and business laid out so plainly fed into the narrative that the LDS church was as much a temporal kingdom as a spiritual one. One wit quipped that President Smith's small concerns, as he had initially characterized his business interests, I have a few small concerns. Would you care to list those? And 12 later, he can't remember anymore. Yeah, he has some small concerns. One wit quipped that President Smith's small concerns included a railroad and a power company. It was a remarkable moment illustrating the worldly entanglements of the church hierarchy.
Yeah. He was splayed out in front of everyone, indicating to the general public that I'm on the board of a bunch of companies and this is how I make my money.
I know, and he's not playing Monopoly.
And so I put some of these companies up. So this is not a full list. This is maybe 30%, maybe 50% of what he said. So this is the cooperative store. I forget which one this was, but this is one of them as well. This is
CCMI.
Yep.
I can tell that one from here.
Mercantile. Yep. Zion Savings Bank and Trust Company. By the way, look up there at the top. Joseph F. Smith, president. Anthony H. Lund, vice president.
President of a bank. I mean, I don't know about back then, but nowadays you make a lot of money being a president of a bank.
Look on the right-hand side. George Cannon, cashier. Lewis Cannon, assistant cashier. So there you are. There's that. Here's the Consolidated Wagon and Machine Company. This was one of the businesses that got named. Here's the Saltaire Beach Bathing Resort. Sort of a thing off the pier that everybody could go and hang out, sort of like an original. If anybody knows Cedar Point Amusement Park, it started off as just a beach and bath resort that people had a good time at. And eventually 100 years later, it had roller coasters, but sort of the same kind of thing.
The beautiful thing, the thing I like at the bottom of the postcard is where it says 20 minutes ride from Salt Lake City on the Salt Lake and Los Angeles Railway. So you can take the railway that Joseph F. Smith is the president of to go visit the Saltaire Beach Bathing Resort that he's also the president of.
Yeah. Here's the Inland Crystal Salt Company. Same thing. I've got it circled there. Joseph F. Smith, president. John Long and L.A. Clayton are the other two officers.
Well, Long is the agent in Kansas City, Mo.
There you go, Missouri. Okay, so just to note, that's how they made their money then, being tied to a bunch of other companies, and they did away with that. You're right, RFM. They got a stipend from the church, and Michael Quinn says that takes care of it.
A modest stipend of $251,000.
But they also have their hand in a bunch of other companies. May I say 100 or 200 companies? I don't know what it is, but it's a ton of subsidiaries. Anyway, I just get curious if the old gimmick maybe changed its format, but the trick is still at work. Anyway, a polygamy question, evasion and perjury claims. We'll refer to this here on the right, but this is on the right, D. Michael Quinn's article, LDS Church Authority and New Plural Marriages, 1890 to 1904, where D. Michael Quinn demonstrated that what the church had taught about the 1890 manifesto being the end of polygamy was simply not true. I'll now read this section of the historical event. The central issue of the Smoot investigation was polygamy, specifically whether the LDS Church had truly abandoned plural marriage after the 1890 manifesto. Joseph F. Smith was uniquely positioned to answer this, being a living polygamist himself. Again, remember, he had acknowledged that. He had married his plural wives in the 1860s to 1880s before the manifesto. Under oath, Smith was frank about some points, but evasive or misleading on others. He freely admitted that he and other top leaders had plural wives from pre-manifesto days. There's a half-truth. In a formal statement, he acknowledged the president and some of the apostles had plural wives prior to the manifesto and continued to recognize the women as still being still their wives. However, he insisted that no church leaders had taken any new plural marriages since 1890, and that neither he nor the 12 encourage, countenance, conceal, or connive at any continuation of polygamy. This line in the sand, no new plural marriages, was crucial, because if evidence showed the church did sanction new polygamous marriages, they would be obviously in violation of the 1890 manifesto, which got the government off their back. Smoot's opponents would argue that the LDS leadership was in open contempt of U.S. law and promises if, in fact, he does tell the truth there. And the truth is they absolutely condoned and continued promoting plural marriages after 1890, as evidenced by D. Michael Quinn in his dialogue article.
Which is why he got his ass excommunicated for exposing this.
Yes.
May he rest in peace.
Yes. All right. Will you take this one?
Is this being quoted from the article?
No, this is not being quoted from the article.
Okay.
The article is just there because that data is being referenced. And I want the viewer to know where they can go if you doubt that this is true. If you were raised a Mormon and you were taught to believe that in 1890 Wilford Woodruff received a revelation that brought polygamy to a dead halt, I would highly suggest you go read D. Michael Quinn's article, and I think you'll clearly come away with the documentary history demonstrating clearly that polygamy continued long past 1890 and maybe even past 1904.
And as you read it, go ahead and ask yourself, why would the LDS Church excommunicate D. Michael Quinn for writing this? Under intense questioning, President Smith denied knowledge of any post-manifesto polygamy. Of course he did. In sweeping language, he swore or affirmed, "It has been the continuous and conscientious practice and rule of the church ever since the manifesto to observe that manifesto. And from that time till today, there has never been, to my knowledge, a plural marriage performed with the understanding, instruction, connivance, counsel, or permission of the presiding authorities of the church." Ooh, what a lie. There never has been a plural marriage by the consent or sanction or knowledge or approval of the church since the manifesto, he reiterated emphatically. Furthermore, he claimed the church was fully complying with anti-polygamy laws, even drawing a distinction between polygamy and unlawful cohabitation. Polygamy, new marriages, was outlawed and not happening, he said. It's not happening. Cohabitation, continuing to live with one's pre-1890 plural wife, is definitely happening. It was technically illegal too, but many were guilty of that, including himself. Yet he seemed to treat it as a lesser offense, because it would be.
And by the way, they did too. He gets fined $300, which is certainly more than $300 in today's terms, but isn't beyond his ability. Again, Brigham Young was a millionaire in Utah. It is not beyond Joseph F. Smith's ability to pay that fine and move on with his merry day without any distress to him.
He does seem to be on the board or the president of a number of corporations.
Yeah.
By the way, $300. I'm not a mind reader, but I could imagine him thinking, I'm paying this as a sacrifice, as expiation for lying to Congress. Let's see here. This hair splitting was perhaps lost on the committee, but it was a key nuance for LDS leaders at the time. They felt bound by honor to care for their existing plural families, even as they agreed not to take additional wives. Notice that they could take care of their existing plural families without living with the wives. That's the cohabiting. That's the illegal part.
If you believe that polygamy, no further polygamous marriages were condoned by the church after the 1890 manifesto, you ought to do some reading up on how the fundamentalist groups started, why there were polygamists in Mexico and Canada and various places in the United States, because their narrative, backed by historical evidence, is that they were commanded by the prophet Wilford Woodruff to go underground with polygamy in order to keep the principle going.
Yes.
Joseph F. Smith is committing perjury on the stand.
Yes. In order to save the church.
Isn't it strange that in some moments where he claims he doesn't get revelation, the believer wants to go, he's lying. He's doing it to protect the church. Here's another instance where he's clearly lying to cover his ass and to protect the church.
Yes. And by the way, I don't mean to give the impression by trying to understand where he is coming from that he's not the one who pretty much put himself in this own position. I know he's been president for 3 years. Okay. And there were presidents before him, including Wilford Woodruff, right? Etc. But mainly Wilford Woodruff. However, the whole thing is this. He put himself in this position. The leaders of the church put themselves in this position by continuing to practice polygamy and encourage and connive at and all those other C words that he uses, to have this done after the manifesto, because the manifesto was supposed to be a smokescreen to the government so they could continue, because they believe this is necessary for eternal life. This is exaltation. This is Section 132 stuff. And so they believe this with all their heart. Of course, they're going to follow that instead of the federal laws. They'll find ways around it, just as President Joseph F. Smith found a way around telling the truth to Congress when he was being questioned about the subject.
The LDS Church might not, at the time, validate, and by at the time I mean later on, validate the 1886 revelation as legitimate, but there's no doubt that Wilford Woodruff, in essence, believed the same thing that Jesus Christ came to tell John Taylor. That,
well, I believe he's on record before 1890 saying similar things, that they'll never lift plural marriage.
1886, John Taylor, and then I don't know if Wilford has done that or not, but by sending saints to keep it going and lying to the U.S. government, you are effectively saying that this is so important that we are going to carry on a mass subterfuge to deceive the U.S. government so that we, in fact, can keep polygamy going. Is there like an 1888 or 1889? I know there's several. By the way, the fundamentalists, Centennial Park, Arthur Hammond, one of the leaders in that group, brought a pamphlet in one day to Family Pawn, and it's like the 7 unpublished revelations of John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff.
Mm-hmm.
And there are several things there. I don't know if any of the other ones have to do with polygamy besides 1886, but you may be right. Wilford Woodruff may have things on the record about that cannot go away. And
I mean, of course, before 1890, I think I recall that. I think that his marriage, Wilford Woodruff's marriage, occurred in 1897, the post-manifesto marriage, 1897. And don't tell me Joseph F. Smith didn't know about that. Come on, man.
Right.
Come on, man.
Right. Okay, there's that. All right, so despite Smith's assurances, the committee had evidence that undercut his claims. They inquired about specific cases. For example, Apostle Abraham H. Cannon, who had died in 1896. It was suspected correctly that Cannon had taken a new plural wife in 1896, well after the manifesto, when asked about a woman named Lillian Hamlin. Joseph F. Smith admitted that it was, quote, my understanding that she was his wife, unquote. He even acknowledged seeing Abraham Cannon traveling with Lillian in California in 1896, and he most distinctly remembered meeting them in Los Angeles. But President Smith denied performing the marriage and claimed not to know when Cannon married her. His memory, when it comes to his businesses and post-manifesto polygamy, he's a little cloudy. He doesn't really know all these things. But President Smith, okay, let's see here, married her. He said he only, quote, suspected it on a trip they took together around that time. These answers were technically truthful, perhaps, but clearly Joseph F. Smith was skirting around full acknowledgement of what he almost certainly knew. And I'll go one step further, approved, condoned, and commanded others to continue the practice of. The plural marriages had been performed, post 1890 with at least tacit approval from some church authorities. And that's the weakest of arguments that you can make. That's the least you could say. Almost certainly, based on the evidence, is that the church wanted to keep polygamy going while convincing the U.S. government that it had stopped. And that went all the way to the highest levels of the church. Church President Wilford Woodruff, who issued that 1890 manifesto, and his successors had quietly tolerated at worst, or even authorized at best, a number of new plural marriages in places like Mexico, Canada in the 1890s. Joseph F. Smith himself, as a junior apostle then, was likely aware of these events. By 1904, however, with the church's survival at stake, he chose to deny any such knowledge under oath. So there's that. Yeah, go ahead. I'll let you read this one, but I just wanted to note the newspaper. This was just a newspaper article. As I did my research, I came across Mormons obey Smith in defiance of court. Witness said he would go to jail rather than disobey orders to produce a mysterious temple record.
Is that the endowment?
Either that or the oath of vengeance that was covered earlier in these proceedings.
Okay. This leads to the memorable spotter episode. I had not heard of this episode, but we'll talk about it here in a second. Senators asked President Smith about other LDS apostles who were polygamous. Okay, so you got to inform on your fellow apostles. He had admitted that 12 out of the 15 top leaders, first presidency in 12, had plural wives. Okay, 12 out of 15. Senator Overman pressed, you say 6 apostles are polygamous with plural wives. Now, that part confuses me because I would think that that math doesn't work out, right? It would have to be more apostles would have plural wives, I would think, if it's 12 out of 15, but maybe I've got it wrong. Anyway, I mean, you could only get to a maximum of 9, 6 apostles and all 3 members of the first presidency. Regardless, you say 6 apostles are polygamous with plural wives. Are any of them violating the law by cohabiting with those wives? Do you know if they've had any children born since the manifesto? Joseph F. Smith stonewalled, I do not know anything about their unlawful cohabitation. I am happy to say that I am not a paid spotter or informer. You think I'm a narc? You think I'm a rat fink? Huh? He responded coolly. This response frustrated the committee. Overman retorted that he might know without being a spotter. Smith stuck to his line, I do not know. This is obviously a strategy to try and say, I'm not this horrible thing. In other words, you're calling me a spot or whatever that was. Apparently, it's like a narc that I'm going to go and spy on people and inform to the government, right? You're calling me that. I'm not a narc. I'm not a narc. We're not calling you a narc. We're just saying, are any of the other apostles married to more than one woman? I do it very reluctantly, he said, simply because I am required to do so by this honorable committee. I do not want it understood, being compelled as I have been to give information and to make statements of opinion in relation to my friends, that I am in any sense a spotter or an informer. If there is anything, gentlemen, that I despise, it is an infamous spotter and informer, and I am not one of those. We deny the allegations and we despise the alligators. This blunt declaration, I despise an informer, was essentially the prophet saying, I will answer your questions, but I want the record to show I'm no snitch. It was a remarkable, I think it was the way he got around he really got around answering a lot of the questions. It was a remarkable moment of defiance and loyalty to his brethren. However, to the senators, it looked like evasion. I'm not a senator, and it looks like evasion to me too. He was clearly holding back details to protect his fellow polygamists.
Okay, some observers and later historians have flatly accused Joseph F. Smith of perjury during this segment of the hearings. They point out that his sweeping claim, never a plural marriage with the church's sanction since 1890, was false. LDS apostles had continued to take additional wives in secret, a fact later confirmed by internal church records and the punishment of certain apostles, Apostle John W. Taylor, son of former church president John Taylor, and Apostle Matthias Cowley, for example, had performed post-manifesto plural marriage ceremonies. These men would resign from the quorum and be eventually excommunicated for it after the Smoot hearings, essentially corroborating that such marriages did in fact occur. Even President Smith's own successor,
Counselor?
own counselor. So I'm trying to figure that out. George Teasdale took a plural wife in 1901. Under oath, Joseph F. Smith admitted to knowledge of these cases. His absolute denials were aimed at saving Reed Smoot's seat and the church's reputation. Again, if the church said, I know we told you guys there was an 1890 manifesto, but we didn't actually obey that, that would have caused all hell to break loose.
Yes.
So he
there would have been like 60 seconds of absolute stillness because everybody would have been shocked that he's telling the truth. But then, yeah, pandemonium would ensue.
Yeah. His absolute denials were aimed at saving Reed Smoot's seat and the church's reputation, but they came uncomfortably close to lies. Now, he's not telling the truth, but
it's really close. It's so close to being a lie. It's almost indistinguishable.
And by the gospel standards of the Gospel Principles book, which lays out the basic doctrines and teachings for the new convert member,
yes,
withholding the full truth is, in fact, another form of lying.
This would qualify in the Gospel Doctrine Standards book as a double whopper.
Yeah. His cousin, Apostle Heber J. Grant, privately fretted that Smith's testimony, quote, had done us more harm than good, as no stranger hearing it would believe he was telling the truth, unquote. In other words, the evasiveness and hair splitting made the church look guilty, even if the technical perjury charges were avoided. To mitigate the damage, Joseph F. Smith eventually acknowledged the ongoing polygamous cohabitation, even as he denied new marriages. When asked how many Mormons were still practicing plural marriage, he estimated not to exceed 3%. Now, by the way, this is a number I've seen thrown out before when people question polygamy inside the church. The response is it really wasn't that many people who were practicing it, maybe 3% or so. And it makes me wonder if this is where they get it from. But of course, Joseph F. Smith is going to downplay how many of the members are actually practicing polygamy. So I thought that was interesting. Only a very small portion, he asserted, mostly older men with wives from pre-1890. Now, this might have played a role in why we say it's, all the husbands died on the Trek West, and these are just people who are helping to give support and financial means and resources to those women, because that answer sort of fits that. These are just old men and, some women way before 1890.
Can I just say that if it's only a very small portion that are still practicing polygamy, he asserted mostly older men with wives from pre-1890. So what are the other mostly? What's other than mostly? In other words, mostly, but there's still some that don't fit this category.
Yeah, and is the mostly the age of the men? Is the mostly pre-1890? Let's move on. Next question, sir. This figure was likely an understatement, but it was an attempt to assure the Senate that polygamy was dying out in Mormonism. So there's that. All right, so if you'll take the result and impact of the hearings.
Yeah, after 3 years of intermittent hearings, the drama finally culminated in 1907. The Senate committee, deeply divided, ultimately could not muster the two-thirds vote needed to expel Reed Smoot. On February 20th, 1907, the full Senate voted 42 to 28 to allow Smoot to retain his seat. So it wasn't even close. They're by a majority allowing him to retain his seat. In essence, the majority agreed Smoot himself had not violated any law. He was only married to one wife, and that punishing him for his religion would set a bad precedent. Reed Smoot was sworn in as senator and went on to serve in the Senate for another 26 years, becoming a respected legislative figure. For the Mormon Church, the hearings were a turning point. President Joseph F. Smith and the hierarchy took decisive action to clean up any ambiguity about polygamy. In April 1904, just 1 month after Smith's testimony, the LDS Church issued the so-called Second Manifesto. In this official declaration presented by Joseph F. Smith in General Conference, the church reiterated its opposition to any new plural marriages, and this time we really, really mean it, and went further, threatening excommunication for any member who continued to enter into or perform polygamous marriages. This had real teeth. Over the next few years, a number of men, including Apostles Taylor and Cowley, were dropped from leadership and later excommunicated for defying this policy. The Second Manifesto, spurred directly by the Smoot hearings, spotlight, effectively ended the era of post-manifesto secret polygamy. No longer would church leaders wink at plural marriages in far-flung locales. Now such acts would be a cause for expulsion.
And here on the left is the Second Manifesto. I do have it enlarged on the next slide. I'm going to make, I've got it here in front of me, so it's a little hard to read there, but it says, I'll read the left-hand side and then the actual statement is on the right. But President Smith, brethren and sisters, of course you cannot help but have noticed that some of our brethren have been absent from us. I regret very much the absence of a number of apostles. We are all sorry that circumstances have prevented them from meeting with us. Elder John Henry Smith has been suffering for some time from inflammatory rheumatism and is still confined to his room. Elder George Teasdale received permission to retire from active duty over 2 months ago, and when he left us was in feeble health. By the way, that was interesting to me. Hugh B. Brown had fought for a change in policy that would allow the top 15 leaders of the church to retire at a certain age. And I think 70's been thrown around, but at a certain age so that they could go off into the sunset and not have to keep being a church leader.
Yeah.
And I found it interesting that there actually is precedent for a top 15 church leader simply retiring.
I think he was one of the counselors.
Yeah. Elder Mariner W. Merrill has been prostrated for some time in his home at Cache Valley. These brethren have our sympathy and our prayers for their recovery. I regret also the absence from this conference of elders John W. Taylor and Matthias F. Cowley. Now I'm going to present a matter. He doesn't explain that though, does he?
No. And, you know, on one hand, they're protesting. On the other hand, Joseph F. Smith doesn't want those cats present to raise their hand in opposition.
No. And he doesn't want to tell the butts in the seats what's going on with those two. They just happen to be absent.
This guy's sick. This guy's sick. This guy's sick. These guys aren't here either. Let's get on with it.
He says, now I'm going to present a matter to you that is unusual, and I do it because of a conviction which I feel that it is a proper thing for me to do. I have taken the liberty of having written down what I wish to present in order that I may say to you the exact words which I would like to have conveyed to your ears, that I may not be misunderstood or misquoted. I present this to the conference for your action. Now, again, I'll say this prior to reading it. First off, this is a person who just testified previously that he has not had any revelation in the church. Second, I'll say this was also taught to me as revelation. I didn't quite understand it. It didn't make sense. I didn't know why a second manifesto was needed if there was a first manifesto that ended polygamy. Seems like that would be sufficient. Never quite figure out what the reason was for it and by what authority it came if the first one was a revelation that ended polygamy. So I say all that so that as I read it, you can consider now the context, knowing the Reed Smoot hearings are going on in the background while this is occurring, that elders John Taylor and Matthias Cowley are not present for the reasons that we all know. If you don't know that, go back and listen to the episode that RFM and I did on that 1936 statement, which I will try to find in the next 24 hours and put in the show notes.
And this is a classic instance, once again, of the leadership of the church doing things they're not supposed to do, getting caught, and then blaming the members for doing it.
Yeah, once again, blaming the members. This is the official statement. Inasmuch as there are numerous reports in circulation that plural marriages have been entered into contrary to the official declaration of President Woodruff of September 26, 1890, commonly called the Manifesto, which was issued by President Woodruff and adopted by the church at its General Conference October 6, 1890, which forbade any marriages violative of the law of the land. I, Joseph F. Smith, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, hereby affirm and declare that no such marriages have been solemnized with the sanction, consent, or knowledge of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Boop, 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 boop. I'm sorry, that's the lie detector going off.
That is a lie. And, quote, I hereby announce that all such marriages are prohibited, and if any officer or member of the church shall assume to solemnize or enter into any such marriage, he will be deemed in transgression against the church and will be liable to be dealt with according to the rules and regulations thereof and excommunicated therefrom. Joseph F. Smith, President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There's your second manifesto. Any thoughts there, RFM? Yep.
Well, I'll tell you, with apologies to Hamlet, it's like he's declaring, I say we shall have no more plural marriage. Now, I know we said it before, but I'm saying it again, and this time, damn it, I mean it. And if you don't believe it, you'll get excommunicated. We haven't been doing it. Now, there's been reports out there that some of you have been doing it. And if you've been doing it, you need to knock it off, or we're going to have to excommunicate you.
Yeah.
It's also an indication, obviously, that Joseph F. Smith felt like his testimony was not universally believed by the Senate and thought he needed to do something in order to prove his good faith.
Yeah, it's a strange thing that your prophet gives a revelation in 1890 and nobody's following it. And why aren't they following it? Well, it's because that other 1886 revelation and the theology around it that you deny ever existed, and even if it did exist, it wasn't legitimate, that you just released recently, and in a much softer, more subtle way, acknowledge that you actually were wrong in the first place, that it was a legitimate, at least alleged. I only mean alleged as in John Taylor claiming it happened, but that the document is legitimately tied to John Taylor. The church acknowledges that. It's a strange thing that you have 1890 to 1904 where rogue leaders of the church are continuing polygamy. The top church leadership that is loyal to the church is not punishing those people. They're not doing anything about it. And just suddenly in 1904, you're like, man, here we are 14 years later and nobody's listening. I think we ought to say it again and really tell them they shouldn't do it this time.
Mm-hmm.
It's so strange from the believing perspective, from the way the narrative was taught to me. it's such a strange thing to try to see it through that lens again.
And then in the 1930s, as you know, first off, this was essential to celestializing. This was essential to glory, okay? This was essential to celestial kingdom glory, polygamy. It's the principle. It's the crowning principle restored by Joseph Smith from God. And this is why the Mormons fought so hard against it and even lied to the federal government about practicing it, because that it was so important to them. And the reason it was so important to them is because, like I said, it was essential to exaltation. They're not going to fight this hard for something that's ancillary to the gospel, that isn't necessary to salvation and exaltation. You wouldn't do that. And they didn't. They went up to the verge of bankruptcy and dissolution, not once, but twice. And so this is how important it is. And I only say that because there's a tendency at this time to try and say it wasn't that important to them. But it was so important that in the 1930s, the church said, okay, celestial marriage, which was synonymous with plural marriage. Up until the 1930s, celestial marriage was synonymous with plural marriage. And Section 132 talks about celestial marriage. It means plural marriage. But it was J. Reuben Clark in the first presidency who came up with the brilliant idea that we will redefine celestial marriage from henceforth. And from henceforth, celestial marriage is not synonymous with plural marriage. Celestial marriage is synonymous with eternal marriage of one man and one woman. So by changing the definition from what it had always been, and what it obviously is in Section 132, but regardless of that, we can now move forward and try and put polygamy in our rearview mirror.
Yes, but it does this other thing. You sabotaged the people that you sent off to Mexico and Canada, and you told them, listen, we're going to keep up a mirage of having ended polygamy. And your job is to keep it going no matter what, because we're never really going to give up polygamy. And then years later, you really give up polygamy, and those people are only doing what you asked them to do, which is to disbelieve you. And so now they're on the outside of the church, and they are looked down upon by you when you're the one who sent them there with a divine mandate to do a thing and told them not to trust you if it looked like you were giving up polygamy.
Yeah, it's a real bummer, huh?
Yeah, it is.
It's like the Mormon version of the Bay of Pigs.
It is one of the worst betrayals of all the things the church has done to betray you and me and all the folks listening to this. It's one of the worst betrayals the LDS church has ever done.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the next one too, because I know you've got the slide after with this oath of vengeance. So I'll touch on it with this. The church also made gestures to demonstrate its loyalty to the law. In 1906, Joseph F. Smith himself appeared in a Utah court, pleaded guilty to the charge of unlawful cohabitation for continuing to live with his plural wives, and he paid a $300 fine. Now, I don't know. I read this, and I didn't know if this was the same as how he was fined by the U.S. government for admitting cohabitation. I don't know how that worked. Maybe this is...
because he wasn't fined for admitting it. He would be fined in the course of some kind of legal proceeding, I would think.
Yeah. The temple ritual, this symbolic act showed that even the church president would submit to U.S. law. The temple rituals came under review as well. Eventually, the troubling oath of vengeance was removed in the 1920s. And I just want to note, after being questioned about it in the Reed Smoot hearing, they kept it in the temple for another approximately 15 years.
What did he say about it? Did he lie about that too?
I don't remember, and I don't think that the particular question and answer were shared here. And it may not even been him that was addressing that particular topic, because lots of church leaders were summoned and subpoenaed to appear before the government and to give their testimony. And so he may not even been the one that addressed that topic directly. But I thought it was interesting that approximately 15 years later, they were so mad at the U.S. government. They're like, 1904, we're going to give that second manifesto, and we're going to do our thing to help the government move on from this, us move on from this. But that oath of vengeance, we're going to keep that a little while longer. I thought that was sort of interesting. So while the church continued to wield social influence in Utah, it grew more cautious about direct political entanglements at the institutional level. And the Smoot hearings forced the LDS Church to assimilate more with American norms, no more open defiance on plural marriage, and no more ambiguity about its role in secular governance. Now, that just didn't hold up, as we saw from good old Gordon Smith in Oregon. But anyway, there's a cool AI picture of a bunch of early Mormons in some temple garb, raising their hand to the square. They don't have the thumb extended, though, so I don't know if it'll hold weight in the hereafter or not. RFM, what is this oath of vengeance?
The oath of vengeance is largely heard of nowadays. Used to be the time was you didn't hear about this very often, and I didn't hear about it, of course, until I did. But it was a part of the temple ceremony. Because it's called the oath of vengeance, many people think that there was an oath that was administered to the people who went to the temple, kind of like the law of chastity, and that you're supposed to seek vengeance against the U.S. government. Not exactly. Instead, what it was an oath and a vow to continually pray to God that he would avenge the United States government for the murders of Joseph and Hiram, the prophets. So I'll read this little bit here. The Mormon Temple Oath of Vengeance, added in the Nauvoo Endowment around 1845, included the pledge that participants would pray and never cease to pray to Almighty God to avenge the blood of the prophets upon this nation. Now, this was a point of interest at the Reed Smoot hearings because they wanted to know if Reed Smoot, as a temple-going Mormon, had taken upon himself this oath of vengeance.
He had.
Yeah. Yes, he had. And teach this vow to their descendants. The oath also mentioned keeping the intent a profound secret, with associated penalties for revealing it.
By the way, another oath. Remember, Joseph F. Smith doesn't do oaths.
Right.
Here's another oath.
Very good. He'd taken the oath of vengeance in the temple many times as he went back there for other people. And yeah, absolutely. But I don't want to swear an oath on the Bible before I testify before the Senate. Instead, I would rather just affirm that my testimony is true. Oh, yeah, you're a sneaky one there, Joseph F. Smith. I think the F stands for fibber. Remember the F? Let's see here. Associated penalties for revealing it, such as having one's throat cut out or heart opened, according to William Smith, brother of Joseph Smith. The blood of the prophets refers to Joseph and Hiram Smith, killed in 1844, and the nation is believed, to be the United States of America. Of course it is.
I just want to note here, it is perfectly reasonable for the U.S. government to question where a Mormon's loyalty would be when on one hand they promised to uphold the Constitution and promised to represent one's constituents and promises to obey the law, and on the other hand one went into the temple in their religious system and made an oath of vengeance against anyone in the U.S. government who played any role at all that could be connected to why Joseph and Hiram died that day in Carthage jail.
Really, they're practically saying that if you put me in government, then I'll be the first guy to work with the enemies of the United States in order to overthrow the country as recompense from God for killing Joseph and Hiram. I don't think that's someone that should be at the top of the list for being a senator.
Yeah. So there's that. All right. I think, yeah, this is the last slide. So in the years following, Reed Smoot became a powerful U.S. senator, co-authoring the Smoot-Hawley Tariff, for example. The LDS Church went forward on a path of Americanization, patriotism in World War I, abandoning political isolation, and even modifying doctrines that conflicted with American sensibilities. Polygamy in the mainline church gradually faded into history, confined thereafter to breakaway fundamentalist groups or the afterlife. And an era of greater transparency began. Never again would church president have to deny new revelation, because for much of the 20th century, no new canonized revelations were even announced. The next time an LDS prophet sat before Congress LDS President Gordon B. Hinckley testified in the 1995, I said Kosovo, it's Bosnia, 1995 hearings on allowing LDS volunteers, aka missionaries, in Bosnia. It was a mundane affair, nothing like the circus of the Reed Smoot case. And with that, I hope that everybody can make sense of why this happened, what happened in it that draws our attention to it in church history, and what the conclusion of that was. Any final thoughts from you? Otherwise, while you're chatting, I will put the link in the live chat. If somebody wants to come in studio and talk about the Reed Smoot case, you can.
I just want to take this whole episode and contrast it with the recent President Nelson's statement at BYU about prophets, and that prophets will always teach the truth. You can't trust this prophet, Joseph F. Smith, even when he's under oath testifying before the Senate.
Yeah, always is a tricky word, isn't it? It sort of locks you into always.
Yeah. And the thing is, what this teaches us is that you cannot believe what a Mormon prophet says about the church. The one thing you know is that he will always put the church in the best light and hide anything negative about the church, even if he has to lie to do it.
I wish I would have had it handy, but it reminds me of the Elder Oak statement. And again, we don't have this as an official statement on the record. It had to do with the book Mormon Enigma and him wanting to limit the influence of the authors. But he is alleged to have made a comment that everything in the gospel can be sacrificed. The doctrines can be sacrificed. The theology can be sacrificed, so long as three key concepts can be kept. And essentially what it boils down to is that you maintain belief that the church has the priesthood, the authority, and that it teaches the true, theology about the atonement of Christ. And everything else can be laid on the altar and sacrificed.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that what that essentially means is that you can change anything. You can reverse any doctrine. Even though you come out today and say this is part of the fullness of the gospel, you can change it tomorrow, and it's no big deal. By the way, I'll put this back up just to show, because it does say it here. If I take down the chat for just a moment, you'll see in the very bottom right of this newspaper article that Mr. Taylor, Tayler, that was the attorney who was asking the questions in the meeting, representing those who were bringing accusations and subpoenas to the church leaders. Anyway, that's that.
Think what Dallin Oaks had said regarding that book, The Mormon Enigma, was that his duty as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles is to safeguard the unique aspects of the church, including its priesthood authority, the testimony of the gospel's restoration, and the divine mission of the Savior. Everything else may be sacrificed in order to maintain the integrity of those essential facts.
And if you don't believe that quote is authentic, just look at what the church has done.
Look at other things he said. Geez, I mean, believe him. When he says, don't criticize me, believe him. When he says, don't question my authority, believe him.
Yeah, they have laid every other doctrine on the altar. You need to believe that Joseph Smith was the founding prophet, that he spoke with God. You need to believe that the current leaders have priesthood authority to act on behalf of God or the church. And you need to believe in the divine mission of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. That's it. And I would even guess that third one might be able to be sacrificed too.
Well, the most important part of the divine mission of Jesus Christ is that he's a Mormon, and he's the guy leading the Mormon church today.
Yeah. So, folks, no one's come into the studio, so we can end it here. Any final thoughts from you? Otherwise, I'll just close it out and we'll go home.
This was wonderful. I love this trip down memory lane. I haven't really taken the time or had the time to study this particular aspect of church history. I think I've heard a few things about it, but this is great. And it brought it all into focus. And a number of pieces in the history puzzle, the jigsaw puzzle, did come together.
And there are tons of cool, like we learned that an apostle retired.
Hey, can I get out of here because I'm not feeling so well?
Yeah.
Okay. right.
Meanwhile, there are other ones that were prostrated for a long period of time and they hadn't gotten the chance to retire yet. So
Right.
sad for them.
Well, inflammatory rheumatism is nothing to laugh about.
There you go. Neither is diarrhea from Taco Bell. But with that, folks, appreciate very much you coming into the show tonight to watch. Appreciate the support. Please like and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. That'll be just a teaser for us seeing you on Friday night for Mormonism After Dark at 8 p.m. And please, if you're a donor, we're grateful for you. We appreciate very much everyone who supports the show. If you're not, we need you. Be part of the team and go to mormonismlive.org, click the donate button and donate something, $5-10 a month. You don't need to send 10% of your gross. We helped you end that years ago. But we would appreciate just a small donation on a monthly basis. It would deeply help us to continue the work that we do and bring you historical analysis and current affairs in Mormonism like nobody else. Otherwise, RFM, it's my pleasure to have you along for the ride here, and very much appreciate you and what you bring to the show and all of the insights that you brought, and can't wait to see people on Friday night. So
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it, and I'm going to make a run for the border.
All right, take it easy. Bye-bye.